Very, very interesting presentation awaiting us, titled The Effect of Religion on Foreign Policy by Professor Dr. Serdar Güner. I'd like to give a brief introduction, a short biography. Professor Güner obtained his PhD degree from the Graduate Institute of International Studies, University of Geneva in 1990, with his thesis focusing on the relationship between the United States, the Soviet Union, and the People's Republic of China in the period 1949 and 1972. He spent the next 2 years as a postdoctoral research fellow at the Department of Government at the University of Texas at Austin. Professor Serdar Güner has joined the Department of International Relations at Bilkent University, where he received Distinguished Teacher Award in 2002. Professor Güner gave seminars and lectures on game theory and negotiation problems at various government agencies and universities, participated to international conventions, and served as a referee for scientific journals. Thank you for being with us. A warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Okay. This is a presentation of a paper that will be published in Foreign Policy Analysis, an academic journal. And I did not present this anywhere else, so this is the first presentation of that paper. Sure. Is it better now? Good. This is the first time I'm going to present this paper that will be published by the Foreign Policy Analysis, the journal, academic journal. And the topic is the effect of religion upon foreign policy. Especially I am concentrating upon the Turkish foreign policy, but I try to give a general framework to analyze foreign policy. So first, we have to note that there's a relationship between international relations theory and international shocks. We have, for example, after the Second World War, we had some advance of computer and mathematical models in international relations. Then later you had the realism, of course, and later you had oil shock, 1973 problem, and there was a emergence of the new theory of international relations. It's called Transnational theory of international relations by Bob Cohen and Joseph Nye, 1977. And then we had the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. And then we had a new type of international relations theory called constructivism that concentrates upon beliefs, subjective beliefs, meaning and idea and discourse in international relations. And the last shock came with the terrorist attack upon Twin Towers in New York, 9/11 attacks. Then 9/11 attacks was another shock to the international relations, and suddenly international relations theorists, they discovered the presence and the power of religion in international relations. So this is an area that must be a lot of research to do, as you have to think that the religions producing all those transnational ideas across boundaries. So you can look, if you want, you can look at the world by a religious lens. Then you can think about transnational communities of religious communities, transnational communities in the world. That's going to represent you some different picture of international relations and world than if you, for example, look at how you look at the world through the nuclear powers, and then finding out those countries with the nuclear powers, and you have a different lens then. So religion gives us a different view, lens of analyzing foreign policy, especially, and in general terms, international interactions. They, of course, provide some kind of identity and differentiation. And the most important is that you have a transnational social context in the world. And that's going to show you where those countries are located within that transnational social context. I've been to Europe, I've been to the United States. For example, just my personal experience, I don't know yours, is that when you are in Europe, they ask you, which country are you from? In the United States, they ask you, which continent are you from? These are different things. And religion is going to give some, your background, your being Turkish, your being a Muslim is going to give the others some kind of lens that they're going to think about you, and so on and so on. So that gives you some kind of power of what religion represents across individuals and across boundaries, and therefore transnational social context. Of course, the beliefs these religions represent affect decision makers' preferences, and so that these preferences, under these preferences of decision makers, you have meaning of international affairs. Is one of the most important example is Turkey and European Union interactions. So we know that from the latest polls and so on in Europe, that the majority of the European population is against Turkish adhesion to European Union. And one of the most important factors of that opposition seems to be the religion and religion and cultural differences between Turkey and other countries in the EU. So we have, in fact, three branches of international relations that could deal with religion. One is liberalism. So liberalism is a theory that takes states as non-unitary actors, so that we have different forces, different agencies within the state. So the states are not rational unitary actors. You have, in liberalism, you have cost-gain calculus does not really matter. So bounded rational individuals somehow produce some decisions in liberalism. In constructivism, you have ideas, discourse, and subjective beliefs and interactions among individuals that generates a new social interaction environment that we call socialization, is going to give you an understanding of interactions across states. As to the rationalism is a term that cuts across several theoretic branches in international relations. Rationalism built upon the rational choice axiom, that is, you try to achieve your gains at some costs and you choose the best means to achieve your objective. So you try to maximize your gains and you have to minimize your costs. And so rationality is exactly that condition. And use of the rationality in international relations and foreign policy analysis can be termed as rationalism. Okay? So the thing is that many international relations scholars, they think that rationalism cannot deal with beliefs and ideas. In fact, desire and beliefs means action. On every action, you have desires and beliefs, and you have desires and beliefs affecting preferences, and preferences affecting your choices. Okay, so that you have the small equation here: desire plus belief is equal to action by Fearon and Wendt. James Fearon is a very world famous game theorist and rationalist, if you want, Stanford University, and Wendt. He's the founder of the constructivist branch of international relations theory. Now I think he's at Ohio State University. So they work together. They produced they produced an article where they merged their skills about rationality and constructivism, so that they showed that rationality and constructivism can be together. So what does it mean? It means the following thing. So the ideas and beliefs about preferences leading to your understanding of maximizing your gain and minimizing cost can be used together. Okay, so I give you the as a case, I choose the new Turkish foreign policy under the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ahmet Davutoğlu. Now, what we have is that the new foreign policy is supporting dialogue between Islam and Christianity and across civilizations, and you have the building stone of Turkish foreign policy is that Turkey has some kind of history. Then the Turkish history, specific history, places Turkey within the transnational social context. Transnational social context in Balkans and Caucasus and Middle East in a special place. So Turkish position is quite advantageous, and we have to profit from this position. So we have to think about how can we use this history of relations in Caucasus, Balkans, and Middle East to our advance to increase our gain at lesser costs. Of course, they always exist, costs. So we can think that if Turkey is successful in terms of foreign policy, what does it mean success here? You can have, for example, unfortunately, latest events between Turkey and Syria is quite bad. But before those events began, we had quite a good relations between Turkey and Syria. We had good relations. Even we started nice relations with Armenia, with some kind of dialogue with all those countries. So we started to have some kind of diplomatic success, and Turkey became quite active around the world. And if Turkey is successful in terms of economics, in terms of other records like human rights and new constitution and so on, and so there will be a success not only for Turkey. At transnational social context, if Turkey can achieve those successes, it means that it's an Islamic success. It's the only country. If it adheres to European Union, it will be the only Muslim country in the European Union. And it will be quite a big success across the world. So I ask the following question. Can we have higher gains and lower costs? Explain the new foreign policy. So if you have gains and costs that are present in status quo foreign policy and new foreign policy, so these comparisons across costs and gains could not be always sufficient to explain new foreign policy. So what we have, the key point of this presentation is that subjective estimates of achieving gains and suffering costs are quite important determinants of new foreign policy. So that could be any foreign policy of another country, you can apply the same framework. So that is that you can think that you have a high gain, and you can think that you're going to suffer less cost. But the most important thing is not those magnitudes of gains and costs, but your subjective estimates of obtaining those costs and suffering those, obtaining those gains and suffering those costs. Okay? So, you can put this as a rationalist framework. You can put the new foreign policy's expectation in the following way. You have what you expect from new foreign policy. So, I have to put these things in terms of equations. So what do I do is that I put the equations, I try to deduce the consequences of those assumptions so that I try to get some discipline in my thinking. So, okay, I need some discipline. That is going to give me a clear language to communicate with you, and then it's transparent. So everything is okay. Over there, you see that expected utility, expected value from new foreign policy is P is the subjective estimate of a government of achieving gain. And G subscript 1 means the gain the government considers. And there's a cost, C subscript 1. That subscript 1, C subscript is a negative magnitude, of course. So you understand that is a negative sign. So 1 minus P is the likelihood of cost. What does it mean? It means the government's subjective estimate of suffering those costs. So the idea behind either you have some gains, but you have some gains across cases, but at some kind of costs. Gains at costs. This is the idea behind those equations. And gains and costs achieved with some kind of likelihoods. Okay? So I assume, this is an assumption, what do we expect from status quo foreign policy, the old Turkish foreign policy, is just the gain from the old status quo preservationist foreign policy is G sub 2, and you have at some cost of that status quo foreign policy. I don't put any subjective likelihoods for that equation. Okay, so I want to understand. I want to find out conditions upon subjective estimates of decision makers. What do they think when they implement new foreign policy? Okay. So we have the following cases. One, if new foreign policy has a higher expectation than the status quo foreign policy, then of course new foreign policy will be implemented, not status quo foreign policy. Well, how could we obtain this? The comparison between expected value of the new foreign policy, expected value from the old foreign policy, reveals some kind of threshold. And that is alpha. Now, on the denominator, you see that G2 minus C2, that is loss of status quo foreign policy. Status quo foreign policy loss. And you had the cost of the new foreign policy. On the denominator, you have the gain of status quo foreign policy, the new foreign policy, and the cost of new foreign policy. So we have to think about when will the new foreign policy implemented? Well, if your subjective estimate of achieving success under new foreign policy is higher than this threshold, then new foreign policy is implemented. Otherwise, a status quo foreign policy implemented. Okay? So look at this again. I mean, so you understand that the gain from the status quo foreign policy, the cost of status quo foreign policy, gains and costs of new foreign policy are all parameters. Changing those parameters, you obtain different thresholds. When you obtain different thresholds, then you can obtain different conditions for the implementation of new foreign policy. Okay? Now, so one of the implication is, if this is difference between the cost of status quo foreign policy and the gain of status quo foreign policy is higher than the cost of the new foreign policy, then alpha is negative. Then in that case, it's always possible that P is a probability higher than that negative threshold. So that means as all probabilities are going to prompt a new foreign policy. Okay? So what does it mean? It means that you have C1, that means cost of new foreign policy exists. Therefore, but still you can have new foreign policy. That implies that new foreign policy can be costly, but you cannot prevent its implementation. Okay. Well, if there's equality between status quo foreign policy loss, and the cost of new foreign policy, then the threshold becomes 0. And that all positive probabilities, all subjective estimates of decision makers' gain from new foreign policy can prompt new foreign policy. So that means slightest belief, 1 over 1,000 chance that we're going to achieve something out of new foreign policy, we're going to implement new foreign policy. Even if you have very small subjective likelihood of success, you're going to implement that new foreign policy, depending on that condition. Okay? Well, if the loss is higher than G1, That's then impossible. You have the new foreign policy to be implemented. It's impossible. But if the gain from the new foreign policy is higher than the gain from status quo foreign policy, then in that case, that G sub 2 minus C sub 2 is higher than greater than G sub 2 is impossible. Okay? So that if we have status quo foreign policy gain is smaller than the new foreign policy gain, then in that case, decision makers may not really even compare these costs of new foreign policy and status quo foreign policy. Yeah. Well, another interesting case is this. I mean, if decision makers think that new foreign policy represents a gain that is exceeding the loss under status quo foreign policy, and if decision makers again assess that the cost of the new foreign policy is higher than the loss through the status quo foreign policy, then alpha is between 1 and 0. In that case, you have two regions. If P is greater than alpha, then you have new foreign policy. If P is smaller than alpha, then you have old foreign policy. So you understand that all these relations between gains and costs produce implications for the threshold alpha must satisfy, and the thresholds alpha must satisfy represent conditions for subjective estimates of achieving gains. Okay. So this is the. So I can assess some conclusions about that. One is that if you have repeated successes through the new foreign policy, then Turkish foreign policy makers can believe that they have some gain and through the new foreign policy, then it's going to reinforce their evaluation of subjective estimates of achieving gain. That is P. So P will be higher. So that even if you have the new foreign policy gain exceeds the status quo foreign policy benefit, and new foreign policy cost is higher than the status quo foreign policy loss, you can still have new foreign policy. Okay? So how can we understand that this is G1? That is this is just algebra. The G1 is Turkish decision makers of assessing what do we gain out of this new foreign policy is an indicator of how they assess transnational context across the world, maybe in dimensions of religion. This is quite an important effect of having an Islamic country having a success in foreign policy in other areas in the world. Okay. So these are the perceptions and beliefs you have to think about. You have to think about how religions can reinforce those perceptions and beliefs. I don't know, maybe Dalai Lama is thinking about those things, the gains of Dalai Lama, but thinking about Dalai Lama, what do I gain out of this? What's the probability that I'm going to achieve that? Okay. So what can we do is that, in essence, religious frameworks, values, generate some constraints upon preferences. Preferences indicate the relationship between parameters of gains and losses, and those relationship between gains and losses indicate thresholds for subjective likelihood of estimates of gain, so that new foreign policies are implemented. Then you can apply this framework for any country in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thought that was a fascinating presentation and really helpful, especially amidst the political and diplomatic perspectives we've heard earlier today, to really get the academic theory also behind this. So thank you very, very much for that.
Maybe quite theoretical.
What's that?
Maybe quite theoretical.
Well, but I thought it was helpful. I think in that sense it really helped to round out the day. And I see you've inspired a number of comments.
Thank you for this interesting presentation. My name is Leçni Dilözde. I'm doing PhD at the University of Tübingen. I have a number of questions. First, you say that religion affects ideas and beliefs, and then you say religion affects identity. And how do you see the link between beliefs and ideas and identity?
Interaction between ideas and beliefs produce identities.
But identity comes first or beliefs?
Who the hell cares?
But the relationship is important.
There's a relationship. If you have ideas and beliefs producing beliefs, or beliefs and identity producing ideas and beliefs, there's a correlation. So bivariate relationship. There's no problem.
And the second question is, okay, you said you can apply constructive and rational choice model. There's no difficulty. Of course, I mean, you can also measure norms and beliefs with mathematical models. There's no problem about that. I accept that. But you talk about subjective estimates. This happens in the politicians' minds. First, how do you measure and how do you apply it to mathematical models, subjective estimates?
We do not measure.
How can you mathematically formulate something that you don't measure?
You can.
How?
Because you need to express some relationships between some abstract ideas. And you have to discipline your thinking. So I cannot talk about Turkish foreign policy and new foreign policy by some history of the republic and so on and so on and so on. I need to put some assumptions, some axioms, and first, I have to derive I have to deduce the consequences of those axioms. My first concern is to explain, discipline my understanding. How can I explain? If someone asks me a question about Turkish new foreign policy, how can I answer that question? I'm not jumping to the conclusion that I'm going to measure gains, I'm going to measure costs, I'm going to measure subjective likelihoods. I cannot really have what's going on exactly in Ahmet Davutoğlu's understanding and assessments of world affairs. I do not know those things. But I can do the following thing. I can put the relations in terms of equations, and I have to think about if Ahmet Davutoğlu thinks like this, then you could have this foreign policy. This is at least an explanation. I'm not going to measure those things.
But if you do not test it empirically, how do you know?
I'm not
how
testing
would you
empirically.
know if it's right or wrong?
I'm not testing empirically.
And the final question is that you just look at one foreign policy area in all Turkish foreign policy initiatives, just one policy as far as I know. And you predict whole foreign policy initiatives according to this one case.
To a degree.
How can you, based on one case in Turkish foreign policy, how can you generalize one finding to overall foreign policy initiatives in the world? I mean, how can this prediction apply to other cases, other foreign policy initiatives?
What's the case exactly?
Like, I mean, can your prediction explain Iranian foreign policy or...
How many predictions do I have?
Just one.
No.
No, I'm saying empirically. Can this prediction fit well with other cases on empirical basis?
I'm not applying.
So how can we say religion affects foreign policy then?
You have to think about ideas, and you have to think about relations between ideas, and you have to put those things in terms of axioms, and you deduce relations between those ideas through those axioms. I'm not applying this. I'm just illustrating the power of modeling in international relations, especially mathematical modeling in international relations, to understand the discipline in our foreign policy thinking. Discipline.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is Max Rössler. I'm a bachelor's student of political science from the University of Münster and currently involved in at the University of Istanbul.
Okay, willkommen.
Thank you very much. Hoş bulduk. I would like to ask you, of course, we are referring quite to in an abstract manner to mathematical calculus of international relations.
This is just a mathematical calculus. This is a primary school algebra. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Sorry. My question would be, I'm sorry if I again would like to draw your attention to the applicable implications of your theory. I would like to ask you how you could explain multilateral integration, for example, of Turkey concerned the developing aid, the aid, not developing aid, you know.
Good. What was your name again?
My name?
Yes?
Max Rössler.
Max, okay, Max.
Sorry. Would you consider this as a reduction of cost through the connection of similar cultures, languages, or a continuity of religious beliefs, or rather a positive approach of gaining gains through the cooperation? Or another example would be the International Organization of the Islamic Conference. What would be your approach to that?
Good. Now, step one. What was your name again?
Max.
Max. Okay, Max. Step one. Simplification. No, I'm giving an answer to your question now. Simplification. I know that many people are interested in understanding and involved in measuring. How can you measure this? How can you measure that? How can you measure this? How can you measure that? So the first thing to be involved in simplification, that means world politics and foreign policy analysis is quite a complicated area, okay? There are so many factors interacting, so many factors, different levels interacting. What are you going to do? Step one, simplify. That means you're going to pick some important parameters that seem to be very important for you as a theoretician, as a scientist, and you're going to put some relationships across between those parameters, like I choose gains and costs. 2 parameters I have. Plus I have the probabilities of subjective estimates. That's the 3. But the real world has thousands and millions and zillions of parameters. What I do is, this type of mathematical modeling is in simplification, and that's going to help us to discipline our thoughts through these simple relationships. Now, about your integration, whatever is the project, it means that you have to think in terms of gains, the sides they're going to achieve, and in terms of costs, sides they're going to suffer, and their subjective estimates of achieving those gains and suffering those costs. Then you have to think about what those expectations are going to generate for choices. A choice becomes rational if it maximizes gain and minimizes cost. That's all. And measurement, the problem is with the measurement and theory and empirical sciences, there's a problem. You can have many different indicators for the same concept. Subjective likelihood, for example, of gain. So there could be so many indicators. So the problem is that which indicator to choose from. For one indicator, your theory works correct. For another indicator, your theory does not work. So this is what we call this. We call this research, academic research.
My name's Elijah Bush. I'm a PhD candidate.
What's your name?
Elijah.
Elijah, okay.
Yes. I just had a question. Rational choice theory is, as you mentioned, a convenient simplification.
Yes.
And we know that there are post-structuralist theories that give infinite varieties. What do you think about bounded rationality or constrained relativism in terms of theories that...
Sure, Elijah, yes, sure.
Because I think we all recognize that a lot of people act in rational ways and that they can explain their behavior, but they behave very differently. And so I think a simple cost-benefit analysis quite frequently fails to predict any number of foreign policy outcomes. If you could comment on that, please.
Well, I can comment on that, but I'm going to recommend Elijah to watch a YouTube video. Could you do that for me? And YouTube video is given by Thomas Schelling, the Nobel Prize winner economist and game theorist. So the assumption of rationality is quite a powerful one, yes. So otherwise we should not really have microeconomics. But there is also bounded rationality, of course. You can present that bounded rationality in infinite many ways. As I can represent, look at this. You have that fund, for example. Alpha is between 1 and 0. How many values alpha can take? So that you can have infinite number of things happening in that type of relationships, that type of analysis, and infinite ways of representing bounded rationality. and that bounded rationality could be, I don't know, this will be the next topic for my foreign policy analysis class for my students at the university. Bounded rationality, March and Simon, you have to think about that, so that you have different ways of understanding rationality. But rationality is the following thing. Rationality is equivalent to consistency. If you prefer A to B and you prefer B to C, then you have to prefer A to C. If you prefer C to A, then there's inconsistency. Rationality is this. I mean, you can think about, there are different ways of understanding rationality. Look at, for example, I have a choice now to go from the top university to my home. So I have three choices, suppose. I'm going to walk in this sandstorm over there. I'm going to take a taxi, or I'm going to use the university car, something like that. So which one I'm going to think? I have to have something transitive. A, B, C, these are. So if I prefer walking to taxi to Bilkent car, then I have to prefer, again, walking to Bilkent car. If I prefer, I'm going to prefer Bilkent car to take me home to walk, then there will be no rationality. So there's a big problem, big definitional problem about understanding rationality within the academic circles also.
Ladies and gentlemen, on this occasion, I would like to ask everyone to please help me in expressing our sincere gratitude to Professor Dr. Serdar Güner. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.